Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to talk about oil pan gasket leaks on an E90 or E92. This will apply to any inline 6-cylinder. I've been asked by a number of viewers to go over this. I've been asked if I'm going to do a DIY on it, and I've already actually done this on the car well before I was ever doing DIY videos on my channel. So the best I can do here is summarize what you can expect if you want to tackle this yourself. I'll try my best to give you guys a general idea. Sorry, this isn't a proper full DIY, but it's the best I could do under the circumstances to give you guys an idea if you want to try it yourself or not. So I'll start by popping the hood and showing you what you need to do from the top. Okay, I don't have it with me currently, unfortunately, but I purchased an engine brace from Harbor Freight. It actually sits right here on the fenders. Sits there, and then there's these adjustable sliders with a chain on it to actually bolt to your engine to support the engine, so that you can dismount it from the engine mounts. If you look right here, there is a threaded hole right there, and in your trunk, I'll show you guys. So you're gonna go into your trunk, and if you lift up this little cover right here, there's a little relief right here, so you can stick your hand in there, and this is your tow hook. So if your car ever had to get pulled up onto a flatbed, you know how there's a notch in your front bumper here, this little access cover that pops out and this screws in there so they can pull your car onto a flatbed if it ever needs a tow. Well, in terms of supporting your engine, you take this top cover off, and then you can actually screw that right into that hole right there, that threaded hole. And that's your point, to actually bolt up your Harbor Freight engine brace via the chain and hold the engine up. Now the reason you have to support the engine as such is because, not because you have to jack it up for clearance or anything like that. It's pretty much going to stay in that position, but what you're going to have to do is jack up the car and go underneath it and drop the subframe. Now dropping the subframe isn't for the faint of heart, and you know, this is not really a shade tree mechanic job at the same time. You know, it can be a little involved, but at the same time, if you guys want to devote a full weekend to it and you're up for it and you don't mind tackling some heavier lifting type of mechanical work on your car, then it's very doable. You're gonna buy an oil pan gasket, and you're going to buy the one-time use stretch torque to yield bolts as a kit, and they're not that expensive, like $100. The labor, if you're to get this done at a shop, is probably upwards of $1,000 and I don't even know what they charge at the dealer, but it's a guarantee. You're going to need to do this on a high mileage car, and it can get to the point where it starts to drip on the ground and it looks like a rear main seal leak, because the majority of the leakage happens between the engine and transmission because of the way the oil pan's designed. But at the end of the day, you can do it at home. You have to just invest in that engine brace, which I'll show on my computer. I'll edit it in. Alright guys, here's the actual engine support bar that you'll need. See if I can get in a large picture here. Not really, but so yeah, these go on the actual fenders. There's rubber supports on them so they don't mar up your fenders, and you're only going to use one of these. Slide it over to the middle, and then I don't think I even used the chain. That hook just basically got in underneath the actual tow bar, and then you just back this out and it lifts up a little bit, takes some slack off, and then you can actually lower the subframe and it will stay in place, putting the weight on the fenders. So that's the actual support bar. Alright, so you guys saw what that looks like. Now I'm gonna jack the car up and give you guys an idea of what's going on the underside and what you'll need to do. I'm kind of going by memory here, and I'm giving you a really general overview of what is involved if you want to do this yourself. You're going to want to take your wheels off, obviously, and part of the suspension actually has to be removed from the subframe to give you clearance. For instance, this control arm, the lower control arm, you can see right there where it, right about there, where it bolts into the subframe, has to be removed. The tricky thing, one of the trickier things to do is the actual power steering rack. It will stay in place, but you have to unbolt it from the actual subframe to be able to get clearance. And then you're going after 6 bolts. Your radiator and whatnot stays in the car. You just lower this away from the radiator and from the intercooler, etc. That's one of your subframe bolts, to give you an idea. It just bolts up to the frame rail of the car, and there's 6 of them. And you have to be able to undo the engine mounts from the actual subframe. And once you've done the steering rack, the engine mounts, and gotten everything out of the way that could potentially interfere with this coming and dropping to a lower position, you'll be ready to lower the subframe via your floor jack. So it's basically this piece that has to come down, and when you do so, you'll have the clearance. You'll basically have the engine supported up at the top like I talked about, and when you lower that down, you're going to basically be able to lower it right down to nearly on the floor. There's harnesses to watch out for bolted to this. You just got to use common sense and take your time and slowly make sure that anything that could get snagged up when you're trying to lower that is clear. Like for instance, I remember I have active steering, and when I was doing my when I was lowering the subframe, the connector for the actual active steering motor was binding up against the frame rail when it was coming down, and I had to kind of shift the subframe this way to get clearance, and then I could move it back that way. You know, you're gonna kind of jimmy your jack left and right to be able to lower that down. And then really, once you get that out of the way, then it's just like any other car. Normally an oil pan gasket's not that involved. You can just literally jack the car up, and then you have clear access to all the bolts and lower it down, and you're in good shape once you're doing an oil change or whatnot. On this car, the subframe prevents you from being able to drop the actual oil pan. If you tackle these heavy duty 18mm bolts, take off the lower control arm, unbolt the steering rack, and use common sense to make sure all the harnesses and anything is disconnected that would bind up, and the motor mounts, with it being supported from the top, you'll be able to lower the subframe enough that you can roll in there with a creeper and go after all the Torx bits that hold the oil pan to the actual block of the car. And then even after, with the subframe removed, you got to jimmy it and play with it, and it's a messy job. You're gonna want to put down some cardboard and whatnot, but once you get the oil pan lowered down, it's relatively easy. If I recall correctly, you got to put a couple dabs of silicone where the front timing cover bolts up to the actual engine itself. There'll be a little slit, so if you don't put a bead of silicone there, then it could leak from there. You have to change your bolts, but all in all, once you get the subframe removed, it's doable. So it's not a very huge job to lower down that splash shield, so I figured, you know what, I'll spend the 5 minutes to show you guys a little bit better. Of course, you have to remove that to be able to do any of this work. It's obviously implied, but so when you look, if you're inspecting one of these cars, let me just give you an idea of what you'll be looking at. So there's the oil pan there. As you can see, mine is bone dry. It was not before. You can see the bolts there. Those bolts are brand new because they're torque to yield stretch bolts, one-time use, so you have to replace those. And if you follow the pan along all the way to the back, you'll see at the back side, right around there, is where you're going to notice the dripping, right about there, and it's going to be really just soaked and saturated all the way along. So Of course, there's that sensor in the pan there. You have to unplug that. Here's where the actual power steering rack bolts to. That's where the power steering rack actually bolts to the subframe. And the reason you got to take that lower bolt out is because it won't allow for the subframe to drop all the way down. I think if you wanted to, I don't recall exactly, I think, yeah, you basically just undo that and then drop the arm and move it out of the way. You can see up at the front here, I think, I'm just going by memory, but I remember this this coolant pipe has to be removed from the actual subframe. It's bolted from the top. And, you know, just the usual stuff that you would expect to be removed has to be removed here. This brace right here has to be removed, this black brace, so you can get to the bolts at the back side of the subframe. And sway bar has to be dropped out of the way. You remove these to actually allow for this to drop. And then, as you can see, all the coolant stuff is unrelated to the subframe. The radiator and everything is supported elsewhere, so that's not an issue. But yeah, you'll just more often than not, you won't have a drip at first. If it's starting to go, your actual cover will have oil on it. So just imagine if you're trying to remove 6 bolts to drop this whole assembly, which goes all the way back there. Control arms, power steering rack, and then the actual motor mounts, which I'm not sure if I can show you. Water pump and all that stuff stays in place. There's the active steering connector that can interfere and get caught up on things as you're trying to lower down. And the harness for the oil pan sensor has to be disconnected. And I did this about 2 years ago or more, and it's still fine, still dry. I think this is a one-time thing you're going to have to do with your car. Let me see if I can get a shot of the actual motor mount. That is the motor mount right there. And there's the 2 bolts that come from the underside of the subframe. So you'll access them from here. They're hex bolts. There's 2 of them. And you remove those 2 bolts, and the mount stays on the actual arm that bolts to the engine, and then you'll be able to lower the subframe. So as you can see, it looks like there's no access to this oil pan. It looks like a nightmare. But imagine this bar is out of the way, this is out of the way, that is gone, all the way back, all this is gone, and your rack just kind of hangs down. Yeah, I know I have this mount is busted up. It's been like that since I got the car, actually, but I gotta change. I just have a zip tie keeping things in place. But yeah, so if you have this big silver aluminum mount, and this black mount's gone, subframe's gone, the rack is waiting down here. It's a little tricky to get the rack back in place to be able to slide it back into these mounts here, but you'll eventually get to it. This coolant pipe's the only thing that you gotta kind of watch out for. That bolts to the actual subframe. Once you get that bolt from the top side, it stays here while you lower. You've dropped your sway bar. It's gonna hang down here and wait, and you're literally gonna have complete clear access to all the bolts. This whole section from there all the way forward will be clear, and all this stuff will be waiting down. So you're gonna kind of shimmy your arms above that. And you have the major subframe bolts like I talked about that go up through the chassis. So you have them in a few spots. So there's like one here, there's one over there, and then there's one at the back side on each side, so 6 total. And you're gonna throw your floor jack here while you lower everything down. But that's basically the gist of it. And then you just have a whole bunch of these hex bolts like this all the way around, and you don't have to do any cleaning or anything. Once you get it down, you just wipe the surface down, and then just where the front timing cover mates up to the actual block of the engine. You just put a couple beads of silicone there so that when you push the gasket into place, it spreads that out and makes sure there's no leaks from the front side. And that's it. You know, it's not an easy job. It's not the kind of job your average DIYer that's just getting into trying out doing their brakes or trying out tackling work on their car themselves can just hop right into. You know, you have to be comfortable with this kind of stuff. And you've had to have done a couple more major services on your car before you tackle this. But all in all, I was asked by quite a few people, have I done it? Will I be doing a DIY? And I have done it before I was ever making YouTube videos. And I took my time. I basically just started on a Saturday afternoon, worked on it for a couple hours, and then finished it off the next day for a couple hours. But I've gotten into some more intensive mechanical repair in the past. Alright guys, sorry this is not a proper DIY. I would have liked to be able to go a lot more in depth and walk you through the whole process, but got to keep in mind that this is done on my car, and I'm only doing this because of the amount of people that have asked me if I could give some guidance on this, and I didn't find any other videos about how to do this on your own E90. So hopefully this is helpful and it gives you guys an idea if you at least want to try to tackle this, or if this is a job best left to your mechanic. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Shows you how to do your own oil pan gasket. Keep in mind that you got to have some mechanical experience and some tools, and you want to devote a couple of days, because if you try to knock it all out in one day, you'll just be really tired and frustrated by the time you're done. But it's definitely doable at home, and you can save yourself a lot of money if you're able to do it yourself. So like I said, sorry it's not my usual DIY, but I wasn't even going to make one of these videos. I figured this would be half-assed, and you know, not too many people would like it, but at the same time, it's better than nothing, right? Alright, thanks for watching. Wow.